The guides are screaming tonight, and the ones who hear it are not asleep. What nobody tells you about that moment, the one that comes somewhere past 11 when the house has finally gone quiet, is that it doesn't start as sound. It starts as feeling. Something shifting below the level of thought, the way your own inner voice begins to sound slightly unfamiliar, like a frequency changed in a room no one else entered, the restlessness moving through your legs, the sense that sleep has pulled itself to the far wall. That's not insomnia, that's something pressing against a nervous system that was built, long before this life began, to receive it. This feeling has visited before. The specific texture of it, wide awake inside a sleeping house, aware that something is happening and equally aware there are no words for it yet. That's not random. The guides don't reach towards someone ordinary. They reach towards someone who has already been waiting in some part of themselves they can't quite name for the reaching to begin. Think about what's actually happening right now. A single body in a single room, in one house among millions of houses on one turning planet, and through that body, something immeasurably older than any of this is trying to pass a message. Not to the world. To this one. Pause. That precision isn't accidental. It's a correspondence so exact that the ordinary coordinates of a life, the address, the name, the daily obligations, start to feel briefly like a costume worn over something far more ancient. The guides aren't screaming because something is wrong. They're screaming because the gap is narrowing, the distance between the world that moves in daylight and the one that opens after midnight. It collapses at a very specific point. On one side, everything you already survived today. On the other, a silence so complete it swallows every unfinished apology, every anxious thought, every resentment carried quietly through the door. When that noise cuts out, something else moves into the space it left behind. Not chaos, not fear. A stillness so clean it makes your heartbeat sound like a broadcast, directed, deliberate, meant for exactly one listener. This isn't meant to unsettle you, it's meant to reach you before the window closes. Because here's what's visible about the person in this moment. The one lying awake right now, heart steady inside a quiet that arrived without warning. This availability didn't begin tonight. It's been present for years, receiving urgency with no return address, carrying a signal that no one nearby seems tuned to, and carrying it without an instruction manual, without a witness, without the one thing every human being is supposed to receive at least once, someone looking back and saying plainly, yes. That is real. The guides see that. They've always seen it. What has felt like isolation is not isolation. It's attunement, not someone lost in the dark, but the one the dark chose to speak through. And there's something beneath all of this, something about what happens after the sitting down, after the stillness finally takes hold. We'll get there. And when we do, the timing will make its own kind of sense. I spent years studying languages built to describe what cannot be said. That's not a metaphor. Archives, lecture halls, front porches of elders who had no real reason to trust a stranger with strange questions, all of it in pursuit of some bridge between a world that only believes what it can measure and a world that only reveals itself to those who stop measuring. And somewhere in the middle of that work, something came into view that my training had no category for. The people who carried the knowing didn't learn it. They inherited it. A grandmother in rural Osaka who could describe the contents of a dream without being told a single word. No schooling gave her that. A healer in the Scottish Highlands who placed her hands 6 inches above a man's chest and named an injury no one had mentioned in 20 years. She said her mother had the same hands. And her grandmother before that. And back further than anyone bothered to count. These weren't skills built through practice. They were transmissions received through blood. Something stirs quietly around the edges of that, or wondering I keep coming back to. Why does this particular kind of knowing arrive so softly? Why does it ask nothing of the person who carries it, and yet leave that person so profoundly alone in a crowded room? That question doesn't need an answer tonight. It only asks to be held. And there's another wondering beneath it, slower, deeper, whether the lineage itself ever rests, or whether it moves continuously, threading itself forward through each sleeping generation, patient as geology, choosing its carriers the way rivers choose their beds. When I traced the pattern backward through a single life, a very ordinary life, on the surface, something came into view that none of my research had prepared me for. Not an absence where a gift should have been. A gift so long unwitnessed it had simply learned to wait in silence. And just beyond that is the question of what the waiting changed. The sensitivity, the refusal to be satisfied by surfaces. The way you could walk into a room and feel the temperature of every unspoken thing hanging in the air, the resentments, the grief, the secrets people carried like stones in their coat pockets. As a child, you probably assumed everyone had this, that it was normal to know when a parent was lying, to feel danger before anyone opened their mouth, to wake in the middle of the night already aware, somehow, that something had shifted on the other side of the world. There was no language for it then. There was a parent who said * too sensitive * and a teacher who said * too many questions * and a world that treated an entire way of perceiving as a design flaw to be corrected. And just beyond that lies. Nobody names it for you when you're young. Nobody sits you down and says * this thing that makes you difficult, this thing that makes you inconvenient, this thing that keeps you awake while the rest of the house sleeps. It is not a malfunction. It is a lineage. *. There was a parent who said too sensitive. A teacher who said too many questions. And a world that treated an entire way of perceiving as a design flaw, something to be managed, corrected, quieted down. Nobody names it for you when you're young. Nobody sits you down and says, this thing that makes you difficult, this thing that makes you inconvenient, this thing that keeps you awake while the rest of the house sleeps. It's not a malfunction. It's a lineage. That word only lands later. After enough years of being told the volume needs turning down, after people pull back because they sense they're being seen too clearly, after the alertness gets read as intensity, the precision as coldness, the refusal to pretend as arrogance. The inheritance delivered in 100 unspoken ways, never once named out loud. There's a moment, it comes for everyone eventually, where the choice becomes whether to keep apologizing or to finally call it what it is. Terrifying is not too strong a word, and the shape of that terror is specific. It's not the fear of being wrong. It's the fear of being right and being alone with it. Pause. A senior lectureship at the University of Edinburgh. 11 years in the building. A Leverhulme Fellowship, 4 years held. An entire professional identity worn in public like a second skin, and then the skin is gone. And the person underneath doesn't know what remains. The first week, the flat wasn't left. A kitchen on Leith Walk, linoleum floor, light moving slowly across it for hours while something unnameable settled into the body. The feeling was hollowness. A bell struck and abandoned mid-ring, still vibrating with nowhere for the sound to go. Sleep came at strange angles. 3 in the morning with the sensation of falling while lying perfectly still, one palm pressed flat against the wall just to confirm solidity still existed somewhere. Eating happened when the body remembered. Emails went unanswered for weeks. 2 weeks after the resignation, standing at the back of a different lecture theatre, a junior colleague teaching the course to 23 students trained for 12 years to dismiss ways of knowing their own ancestors once carried in their bodies, watching from the back while invisibility settled over everything that had once been named. Something gave way inside the chest. Not collapse. Release. A door jammed for decades, finally swinging open. The thing that needed managing was the thing that had been given to use. It always was. This isn't a poetic reframing of a life. It's functional. The sensitivity carried now didn't begin here. It traveled forward through a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandfather who had no permission to speak it aloud, who buried it under pragmatism and duty and the sheer exhaustion of surviving, who passed it forward without a manual because nobody gave them one either. And now it sits in the body like an instrument that's been tuned but never played. Waiting. What changes when the apologizing stops isn't that people suddenly understand. They won't. What changes is that the energy spent making yourself tolerable comes back as something else. Voltage. Discernment. The capacity to sit in a room and feel everything moving beneath the surface without needing anyone else to confirm what you already know. That's when the inheritance becomes the calling. When you're lying awake tonight, when the clock reads 11:27 and the nervous system is humming like a live wire, that's not interruption. That's activation. The frequency has been searching for a receiver, and the one built to hold it is already responding. Pause. The guides were never assigned to deliver information. They were assigned to wake something up. That's what's really happening. The transmissions, the synchronicities, the number sequences, those are confirmation that the receiver is online, not the message itself. The awakening is the message. The rest is just evidence that the channel is clear, and there's a physical sensation that arrives in the body between 11:52 and midnight, something with a name in 3 separate traditions, none of them the one you'd expect, and it needs to be recognized before the window closes. So let me name something that happens to people who carry this kind of wiring. A specific pattern nobody warned about. And it goes like this: the very sensitivity that makes a person capable of receiving high-frequency transmission is the same sensitivity that makes them vulnerable to one particular form of doubt. Not the doubt that says this isn't real, that one has already been moved past. Too many confirmations. Too many synchronicities landing with a kind of mathematical precision. Too many moments of knowing something before there was any earthly way to know it. That stack of evidence has grown too high to unsee. No. The doubt that comes for people who carry this wiring is more sophisticated than that. It sounds like this: maybe I'm manufacturing all of it. Maybe the wanting is so strong that the mind is building the signs out of nothing. Maybe the ringing is just tinnitus. Maybe the restlessness is just insomnia. Maybe this isn't a calling, maybe it's loneliness, and a very elaborate way of living with it. That's the doubt. That's the one. Pause, and just beyond it is something the guides have been trying to surface all along. Not a resolution, but a doorway into a kind of knowing that doesn't need permission from the skeptical mind. A knowing that was there before language arrived to name it. The mind wants proof. But proof is a cage built from language, and the transmission arrives in a language the mind never learned. It comes in the hour before waking. In a flush of warmth across the palms, in the sudden, quiet certainty that a name should be spoken aloud. The conscious self keeps asking for a signature. The body has been receiving one for years without needing to translate it. Think about what happens when sleep comes without a fight. Not the collapse into exhaustion, that's not sleep, that's escape, but the slow, gentle dissolving where the watcher inside gradually releases its grip on the day. There's a moment, barely perceptible, where the line between self and everything else softens into something that doesn't matter anymore. In that moment, the question of whether any of this is real simply dissolves. Not because it was answered, because the one asking was never the one receiving. That is the one. The mind wants proof, but proof is a cage built from language, and what arrives here doesn't speak that language. It comes in the hour before waking, in a sudden heat across the palms. In the quiet certainty that a name needs to be said out loud. The conscious self keeps asking for a signature. The body has been reading one for years without needing to translate a word. Think about what happens when sleep comes without a fight. Not the collapse into exhaustion, that's not sleep, that's escape, but the slow dissolve where something inside you gradually lets go of the day. There's a moment, barely there, where the line between self and everything else just softens, goes quiet, and in that moment, the question of whether any of this is real doesn't get answered, it just stops being asked. Because the one asking was never the one receiving, and here's where we arrive at the exhale that's been waiting, that gentle unanswered wondering that's been hovering at the edges since the beginning. The question was, if this is real, why does it arrive so softly? Why not trumpets? Why not something carved unmistakably into the sky? Because a trumpet wakes the personality. And this isn't meant for the personality. It's meant for the one who remains when the personality falls away. The softness isn't weakness, it's precision. Only what is real in you can hear what is real in the signal. So the waking self doubts. Let it. It was never the intended recipient. What's been surfacing through the numbers, through the silence, through a body that weeps without being told to, isn't confirmation. It's calibration, a slow tuning, an alignment of the instrument so that when the next layer opens, the structure has already been shaped to carry what arrives without cracking at the seams. The quiet was never absence. The quiet was preparation, and just beyond that preparation is something vast and entirely still. A knowing that doesn't require belief, only attention. It settles into the bones the way warmth settles into stone after sunset when the stone has been holding the sun all day without saying a word. That's how the next sign arrives. Not as a shout. As a glance toward a clock that was always going to read what it reads. 11:11, 11:33, 12:00. There's a difference between looking for confirmation and receiving it, and that difference has already shown itself. Life moves forward, and then a glance upward finds the clock already displaying something that lands like a signature, not because anyone was counting down to it, because it was already there. The evidence arrived before there was time to manufacture it. The only thing left is whether what's already known will be trusted, and this is where the body tells the truth the mind keeps trying to soften. When midnight closes the portal, when the window seals itself without ceremony, something happens in the body that almost nobody describes. It isn't pain, it's more like a hollowing. A brief, wordless moment where the chest seems to expand by a fraction, and something that was present just a moment before simply isn't anymore. Not lost, pause delivered, moved into the next chamber of the work without any applause. The ribs feel it, the sternum registers it. The breath pauses, not because it's being held, but because the body is recalibrating around an absence that is actually a completion. This is the part that goes unspoken. The download doesn't land with fanfare. It lands as a quiet clearing, the old code leaving so the new structure can stand on its own. That's why the warmth that follows means something. When a hand rests against the chest, not as a gesture, physically, fabric under palm, the nervous system offers its only available testimony, not relaxation. Integration. The body knitting itself around something that was just installed while the conscious mind was somewhere else entirely. And here's what was left hanging earlier, waiting for a moment this still to hold it. How does anyone know the season has truly shifted and not just been imagined? The answer comes through the body first, and the mind second. The body stops bracing. The shoulders drop half an inch without being asked. The jaw releases a tension so familiar it had forgotten its own name. These aren't small psychological adjustments. They're structural. The season doesn't announce itself, it reconfigures the instrument and waits to be recognized by the new resonance. What comes next won't arrive the way you pictured it. It was never going to feel like softness. It was never going to feel like relief. It was going to feel like precision, and precision can feel like pressure until the frame remembers it was built to hold exactly this.